Right after that, the mayor announced he was going to dedicate a monument to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at UM Plaza on the 50th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations in San Francisco. So we think, wow, what a perfect opportunity, since we're being beaten and jailed every day next to where this monument is going to be erected, for upholding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we call for another Food Not Bombs World Gathering. We rent a convergence space near UM Plaza, and over 600 people register. We have workshops on how to make an FM radio transmitter, how to do organic gardening, composting, how to run vehicles on vegetable oil. We also invented this thing called Indie Media, where we could upload news about the gathering during the 10 days, and we started indie media centers all over, and it was like an amazing 10 days where there's over 600 arrests, half of which were just for sharing food with ourselves, the other half for like marching to Clinton's banquet and things like that. And so after that, we get a fax from these activists in Europe saying that they translated my first book into Spanish, and they wanted me to do a book tour. And I go over there. It turns out they're trying to stop the European Union, what they called the Maastricht Treaty, and they were talking about how the World Trade Organization was involved and tried to make a Eurozone, and how that would cause horrible economic hardship for thousands and thousands, maybe millions of people in Europe, and they wanted to stop it. And so after the tour, we decided we'd do a tour of North America called the Unfree Trade Tour. So we went to 60 cities in the US and Canada, and we advocated that if the World Trade Organization ever had a summit in North America, we should go there and try to shut it down. And 12 months after the tour, it was announced there would be a summit in Seattle in '99. So everybody that signed up on our sign-up sheets, we called them up and we said, let's go and try to shut down the WTO. We started a project called the Direct Action Network, where we would practice nonviolent blockades and everything in our communities, and thousands of people signed the nonviolence pledge, and we actually shut the WTO down. And then right after that, I get an email from a journalist in Australia. She said she'd been filming Aboriginal people and Earth First trying to stop a gold mine in the sacred land in the bush. And she said she just finished that documentary. She was very fascinated that this group, Food Not Bombs, had shared food at the base camp for 2 years feeding these protesters. And she wanted to come interview me and find out more about the group. So I said, that's cool, you can come interview me, but you should visit people that serve food and cook food and depend on Food Not Bombs here in North America. So she comes over, and during the 45-day trip here, she finds out she's learned that she's won Best Environmental Documentary of the Year and has to go to Spain to get her award. And the punk band Kafka from Genoa, Italy had translated my book into Italian, and they asked me to do a book tour. So we go back over to Europe, and the first city we go to is Zagreb, Croatia. And the people in Zagreb, Food Not Bombs, are like, why are you just visiting us in Zagreb? We have groups in 6 cities in Croatia. I'm like, wow, I didn't even know there's 6 cities in Croatia, let alone 6 Food Not Bombs groups. That's insane. And so everybody agreed to come to the Zagreb and help cook food and everything. And I gave a presentation to everybody. And the next day was Anti-McDonald's Day, October 16th. So we went down to the McDonald's to hand out vegan burgers. And they had ordered these black balloons with golden arches that said, eat shit in Croatian, to give all the kids as they came into the McDonald's. And then another animal rights group had bought a severed head of a cow at a slaughterhouse and brought it to the restaurant on a silver platter. And then the Food Not Bombs kids in Zagreb said, man, you should go to Serbia, where they were doing Food Not Bombs while being bombed. So we went to Belgrade, and we met them at this place called Rebel Squat, which was this huge mansion in downtown Belgrade. And they're telling us what it was like to be cooking and serving food while cruise missiles would go down the street and veer off and blow up houses, and just some incredible stories, whole mountains disappearing. And Emma, who was a nursing student, was working in this special hospital with 750 severely mutated children that were mutated from the depleted uranium. And that was only just a couple of years after the end of the war. And so we served food downtown at the McDonald's there, and then we went to Istanbul, and turned out George Bush was going to come there, and there's going to be a NATO meeting. And so we organized the Food Not NATO action outside the first McDonald's in the Muslim world. And the first guy in line turned to everybody and said, this is great food, we love it. This is in Taskin Square, where those big protests just happened with Ghazi Park. And so he was all excited, saying, this is a wonderful food. And it turned out he was the manager of the McDonald's, so all the employees come marching out with trays of ice cream and Coke to give out for free for everybody. And then we went over to Tel Aviv. And when we finally find the Food Not Bombs kids there, they tell us that they had refused to fight in the Israeli Defense Forces when they got out of high school and they went to prison. When they got out, they decided to have a Refusenet conference, and they figured that they needed to have food at their conference, so they started a Food Not Bombs to feed their conference. And these Palestinian farmers came and told them how they were blocked out from their fields and they couldn't harvest their food, but they were going to have a peace camp for 2 months on the West Bank. So come on in. So the Food Not Bombs activists, during this 2 months of feeding this peace camp, decided that they would organize a thing called Anarchists Against the Wall. And so the day we were arriving, on December 26th, it turned out that they were doing the first Anarchists Against the Wall action. And they had arrived to the wall near where the peace camp had been, started cutting through the one of the gates when the Israeli Defense Forces arrived, started shooting live ammunition at them. And one of the Food Not Bombs activists, Gil, got injured, and so they were busy trying to get him back into Israel to a hospital, and that's why they never came to the airport. And then the next day, we made this huge amount of food, went to a protest organized by Greenpeace outside the Knesset, where they were trying to get the Israeli government to pass a law that all foods would have to be labeled if they're genetically modified or not. And at 5 o'clock, the activists come out and they go, yay, they passed a law. All the GMO foods have to be labeled in Israel. And we planted all the trees on the path of the West Bank, and on the West Bank near Jerusalem, where the wall was supposed to be put up. And we fed, there's a lot of Russian immigrants that live on the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and so we fed them. It was this amazing experience. And then when I came back, I got a call from a woman named Cindy Sheehan. She wanted us to feed, she was camping outside of Crawford, Texas, outside of George Bush's summer home, and wanted to ask him why her son Casey had been killed. So we called Dallas Food Not Bombs to bring food, but they couldn't. They were being arrested every week. So I went there with my friends, and we fed people at Camp Casey all the rest of the summer. And it's there in that time we find out there's a hurricane coming towards the Gulf. So we decided we'll help with the rescue effort in New Orleans, and so I put up a little webpage, foodnotbombs.net, Katrina, and the first volunteers came down to Baton Rouge from Hartford Food Not Bombs, and Dan calls me and said, wow, we got to a military checkpoint and they won't let us in, we need a letter of permission. I said, don't worry, Dan, I'll make you a letter of permission. So I made some letterhead, wrote a letter of permission, signed it, emailed it to him. He put it in the window of the bus and goes to the checkpoint the next morning. And they go, oh, that's great, you got your letter of permission. So now the Red Cross is calling, like I'm getting all these calls. Hi, the Red Cross gave us this number for food, where's the food? And before long we had kitchens in 20 cities in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. It turned out the Red Cross had an agreement, they wouldn't bring food down there. And we fed people for the next 8 months in all these cities, including also the Astrodome in Houston and the convention center there. And then I get an email from Food Not Bombs in St. Petersburg, Russia. They had been providing meals at anti-racist protests for many years. And so while they're sharing food at their regular meal on Sunday at the downtown bookstore, a group of neo-Nazis arrived with knives and started stabbing the Food Not Bombs volunteers, killing the founder of St. Petersburg Food Not Bombs, Timur. So this became a pattern where Food Not Bombs activists were being killed while either cooking at protests or serving food on the streets in cities all over Russia. And then one day, I get another email. It turns out that neo-Nazis had set off a time bomb at the St. Petersburg meal, but we were late by about 10 minutes, so no one got hurt. And I have photos of that in the Food Not Bombs book. And then I also got emails from Christchurch, New Zealand. They said they were going to protest the free market economic policies that their government was proposing by having a really, really free market and giving away free food and free everything in the city park once a month. And that idea started spreading all over Asia. There was on Buy Nothing Day in Jakarta, they had a huge, really, really free market with free haircuts, free acupuncture, free massages, as well as free appliances and food and clothing and so on. And then Heather Flores emailed saying that she had seen all these trucks of grass going, lawns being grown in the Willamette Valley, and she was working in Eugene Food Not Bombs, and she just thought it was horrible. She'd be gardening and watching the sod be sent south. So she started a project called Food Not Lawns Community Gardens, and before long Food Not Bombs activists all over the world were taking over abandoned lots and bringing the people eating with them them to help them cultivate organic vegetables and fruit trees in these empty lots. And we have like a huge one, for instance, in Hempstead at the Long Island Railroad train station. We have them there. There's hundreds of Food Not Lawns community gardens now, and people just growing vegetables in their front yards, if nothing else. And also Homes Not Jail started getting big again. And around that time, the Florida city started making the large group feeding laws, and one of our volunteers was arrested in Orlando. And so we took that to court, and he won all the cases, and then we lost in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta, Georgia. And so we prepared to be arrested in June of 2011. At the same time, we were already starting to work with other groups like Margaret Flowers and Kevin Zees and other organizers to do an occupation of Freedom Plaza near the White House on the 10th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. And so we start getting arrested, and we have the city of Orlando makes 24 arrests. But Anonymous is blocking the Disney websites and Universal Studio websites with images of Food Not Bombs activists being arrested, saying, "Free Food Not Bombs, stop the arrests." And so eventually the mayor freaks out, and he announces, "Okay, I'm going to stop arresting the Food Not Bombs, and they can serve anytime they want in front of City Hall, and I'll even come with a pepper from my garden to help them out." And so that stops the arrest. But now, when I get out of jail after 19 days, my inbox is full of adbuster emails about Occupy Wall Street. So we mobilize even more, and we set up a kitchen in Zuccotti Park. And after doing that, I go down to DC, and I thought originally I was going to do Freedom Plaza, but I found a bunch of people on K Street doing another Occupy there, McPherson Park, so I helped them with their kitchen, and before long there's kitchens all over the world. And I go to Boston, Occupy Boston, with a big delivery of produce from farmers in Western Mass, and I set up the table after breakfast, and these people walk by and they go, "Oh wow, we do Food Not Bombs in our town." I go, "What town's that?" And they go, "Oh, Johannesburg, you know where that is?" And I go, "Is that South Africa?" And they go, "Yeah, that's South Africa." And I'm like, "Wow, I haven't heard from you and since you sent me a link to your MySpace." And then I pointed to there was a fire hydrant across the street from where my table was. I said, "See that fire hydrant, the yellow fire hydrant?" And they go, "Yeah, what about it?" I said, "Well, that's where the first Food Not Bombs meal ever happened on March 26, 1981, where we came out to protest the policies of the Bank of Boston, and that they continued to invest in the way they were. People in America might have to actually stand in line to eat at soup kitchens." And sure enough, 33 years later, people are standing in line to eat at soup kitchens. And so I got an email shortly after that from St. Petersburg, Russia, Food Not Bombs. There's a ship called the Aurora that fired the first shot in the Bolshevik Revolution. It's now a historic museum. Well, on the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, they snuck past the guards, climbed up on the mast of the ship, took down the Russian flag, and they put up an Occupy flag, which was a pie with a slice taken out of it, and like a Jolly Rogers, instead of bones, they had a fork and a spoon for the bones on a Jolly Rogers. And then I ended up going over to Iceland, and it turned out that people made fun of them for feeding people. No one's poor in Iceland. And then it turned out the prime minister, and who was also the president of the bank, National Bank, had invested in the housing market in the U.S. And so their economy collapsed. And people would read the flyers at the Food Not Bombs meals every Saturday, and eventually they say, "Man, we should march on the Parliament building." And so sure enough, they would march every Saturday after the Food Not Bombs meal to the Parliament building. It turns out there's a 7-Eleven type store in Iceland where the logo is a pink pig, like a piggy bank, bright pink, on a blue background. So they take that flag and they climb up on, some Food Not Bombs kids climb up on the Parliament building, they take the Icelandic flag down, they put up the discount store flag, and everyone cheers, and the police arrest them, and they all march to the police station to free the activist, and then the prime minister resigns, and now they're crowdsourcing their constitution for Iceland today, trying to come up with an actual real democracy. And they voted twice to reject paying out the banks first before paying out the people. So now Food Not Bombs is in over 1,000 cities of the world, and I just was visiting them in the Philippines, where they're before this most recent typhoon, where they are working on making like footbridges in neighborhoods so people can get through the floods, and are providing food and all kinds of other support to people. We have a chapter in Cebu, which is close to the epicenter of the typhoon. And I went to Indonesia, and we have chapters in over 100 cities there. And They had been involved. The Medan food not bombs was at the epicenter of the Christmas tsunami, and they did the rescue effort there as well. So